He was 18, homeless, and the only thing he inherited was a single, rust-pocked key to a derelict warehouse his stepmother claimed was worthless. What he discovered inside wasn't just about the past, it was about to become his entire future. If you've ever felt like the world has forgotten you, or if you've ever had to start over from nothing, I think this story might be for you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because this is one for the books. My 18th birthday wasn't marked by a cake or a party. There were no cards stuffed with cash, no well wishes from family. It was marked by the quiet, final click of a deadbolt. I stood on the porch of the only home I'd known for the last 6 years, 2 duffel bags at my feet, and watched the curtain twitch in the living room window before falling still. Brenda was inside, probably timing me. She'd given me exactly 10 minutes to gather my things after I got home from school. "My key," she'd explained with the sterile calm of a surgeon delivering bad news, "no longer worked." "You're an adult now, Leo," she'd said, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She wasn't yelling. She never yelled. Her cruelty was always quiet, delivered in neat, reasonable sentences that made you feel like you were the one being difficult. "Your father's estate is settled. This house is legally mine. Your legal guardianship is terminated. It's time for you to start your own life." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that I hadn't already tried to say in the 2 years since Dad died. 2 years of walking on eggshells. 2 years of being treated like a piece of furniture he'd unfortunately left behind. My presence was a loose thread in the perfect tapestry of her new life, and on my 18th birthday, she was finally allowed to pull it. She held out a thin manila envelope. "This is it," she said. "The sum total of your inheritance." I took it. My fingers felt numb. I expected it to be light, maybe a few $100s she'd scraped together to officially wash her hands of me. But it had a strange weight to it. A small, hard lump at the bottom. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a warehouse," she said, a faint, dismissive smile playing on her lips. "Out in Crestfall. Your father bought it years ago, some foolish project he never got around to. It's a heap of rusting metal on a worthless plot of land. The property taxes are already overdue. Honestly, she did you a favor by not listing it as an asset during probate. It's more of a liability. But it's yours. The deed is in there, along with the key." She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my worn-out sneakers. "Good luck, Leo." Then she closed the door. The click echoed in the sudden, sharp silence of the afternoon. I stood there for a long time, the envelope clutched in my hand. The sun was warm, but a chill had settled deep in my bones. I was 18. I was homeless. And all I had to my name were 2 bags of clothes, the $74 in my wallet, and a key to a worthless building in a town I'd never even heard of. I could feel the key through the paper, cold and jagged. A liability. That's what she'd called it. That's what she'd called me, too, in 100 unspoken ways. I slid my finger under the flap of the envelope and pulled out the contents. A folded, official-looking document, the deed, and a single, heavy iron key. It was old, the kind you see in movies, with a complex, toothy bit and a simple, round head. It felt ancient, like it belonged to a castle or a dungeon, not a warehouse. Crestfall. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly, and typed the name into a map search. It was 150 miles east. A tiny dot in a sea of green and brown, nestled in the foothills of mountains I'd only ever seen from a distance. A bus ticket would cost me $40. I looked back at the house. The perfect lawn, the manicured rose bushes, the gleaming windows. It was a life I had no part in anymore. It had never really been my home, not since Dad was gone. It was just a place I was allowed to stay. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of cut grass and finality. I had $34 left, a key, and a destination. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't even a hope. It was just a direction. West was the ocean. South was the city. North was more suburbs. East was Crestfall. East was the only thing that was mine. I shouldered my bags, the weight of everything I owned settling on my back, and started walking toward the bus station. I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me to see. The bus ride was a long, rumbling journey into a part of the state I didn't know existed. For the first hour, the landscape was familiar. Strip malls giving way to sprawling suburbs, a concrete and asphalt tapestry I knew by heart. But then, the buildings started to thin out. The 4-lane highways bled into 2-lane country roads. Houses were replaced by barns, manicured lawns by overgrown fields. The world outside my window grew quieter, older. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, the vibration of the engine a constant hum in my skull. Every mile put more distance between me and Brenda, between me and the life that had just ended. It should have felt liberating, like an escape. It just felt empty. I reread the deed. The legal language was dense, but the basics were clear. A single parcel of land, zoned for industrial use, with one structure. My father's name was listed as the original purchaser, with the property transferred to me, Leo Vance, upon his reaching the age of majority. It was all coldly official. There was nothing of my father in the sterile black ink. No hint of why he would buy a place like this. My dad was an accountant, a man of spreadsheets and sensible shoes. He liked order, predictability. He fixed leaky faucets on Saturdays and did our taxes in February. He wasn't the kind of man to buy a heap of rusting metal on a whim. At least, the man I remembered wasn't. But after my mom died, and especially after he met Brenda, he'd become quieter, more withdrawn. There were long hours he spent in the garage, tinkering with things I didn't understand. Brenda hated it. "He's just wasting time on that junk," she'd complain. "He should be focusing on us, on our future." Maybe the warehouse was part of that secret world he'd built for himself. A place to store his junk, far away from her disapproving eyes. The thought made a small, hot coal of anger glow in my chest. She'd systematically erased him from the house. First his workshop in the garage became her craft room. Then his old records were boxed up and put in storage. His favorite armchair was replaced. By the end, the only picture of him left was a small one on my nightstand. And now, she was dismissing this last piece of him as a worthless liability. The bus wheezed to a stop in what I assumed was the center of Crestfall. I was the only one who got off. The station was just a covered bench on the side of a sleepy main street. The town was quiet. A few storefronts, a diner, a hardware store, a post office, looked like they hadn't changed in 50 years. The air smelled different here, cleaner, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth from the mountains that loomed in the distance like silent green giants. I checked the address on the deed again. It was on something called Ironwood Lane, on the edge of town. My phone showed it as a 20-minute walk. My duffel bags felt heavier now, but I adjusted the straps and started walking. The town gave way to a semi-industrial area pretty quickly. The lots were bigger, separated by chain-link fences. I passed a lumber yard, a concrete supplier, and a few other low-slung, functional-looking buildings. Then the road turned to gravel, and at the end of it, sitting alone on a large, weed-choked plot of land, was my inheritance. Brenda was right about one thing. It was a heap. A massive, corrugated steel box, the color of rust and despair. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the walls a mottled brown and orange. The roof sagged in the middle, and the large roll-up door looked like it hadn't moved since the Carter administration. It was surrounded by a tall fence, but the gate was secured with only a simple, rusted chain and a padlock that looked just as ancient. For a moment, I just stood there, at the gate, the key heavy in my palm. This was it. The grand punchline to the joke of my life. She'd kicked me out and sent me on a wild goose chase to a literal pile of junk. The urge to laugh was so strong it felt like a sob. Or maybe it was the other way around. I could just turn around, hitchhike back to the city, find a shelter, get a job washing dishes. Forget this place. Forget my father's last, strange gift. But my feet wouldn't move. This place, this liability, was the only thing I had left of him. It was a question he'd left for me to answer. Why this place, Dad? Why here? I walked to the gate. The padlock was a solid chunk of rust. I slid the old iron key into the slot. It resisted, gritty and stiff. I put my other hand on it, closed my eyes, and turned with all my strength. For a second, nothing happened. I was about to give up when I heard a painful, grinding screech. The lock shuddered, and then, with a loud clank, it popped open. The sound was deafening in the silence. I slid the chain off the gate and pushed. It opened with a groan of protest, its hinges complaining loudly. I walked onto the property. The weeds were knee-high. The ground was uneven. As I got closer to the building, I saw that it wasn't just a warehouse. Tucked away on the side, almost hidden, was a smaller, standard-sized door. It had a newer, more modern lock. My heart sank. The old key in my hand was for the gate. Of course, the building itself would be locked with a key I didn't have. It was the perfect, final cruelty. I walked up to the door anyway, just to confirm. I was about to turn away when I noticed something etched into the metal frame, just above the lock. It was a small star, clumsily carved, no bigger than my thumbnail. It was the same star my dad used to doodle on everything. On napkins while he was on the phone, on the margins of the newspaper. He told me once it was his initial, for Vance, but drawn like a constellation. My constellation. A flicker of hope, small and fragile, ignited inside me. I looked at the old iron key in my hand. It was for the gate. It couldn't be for this door. But what if? I slid the key into the modern lock. It fit. It fit perfectly. I held my breath and turned. The lock clicked open with an easy, satisfying snick. I pushed the door, and it swung inward into a pitch-black space. A wave of cold, stale air washed over me, carrying the scent of dust, oil, and something else, something like time itself. I stepped across the threshold, my eyes struggling to adjust. The door swung shut behind me, plunging me into absolute darkness. The sudden blackness was disorienting, total. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air was thick and cold, heavy with the smell of concrete and decades of stillness. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the vast, silent space. My hand fumbled along the wall next to the door, searching for a light switch. My fingers brushed against a metal plate, then a small, stiff toggle. I flicked it up. Nothing. I tried again. Down. Up. Still nothing. Of course. The power would have been shut off years ago. My phone. I dug it out of my pocket, my hands clumsy in the dark. I turned on the flashlight, and a narrow, bright beam cut through the oppressive black. I swept the light across the space in front of me. The beam caught floating motes of dust, a galaxy of tiny particles suspended in the air. The floor was concrete, cracked and stained. The space was cavernous, far bigger than it had looked from the outside. The ceiling soared up into darkness, lost beyond the reach of my small light. And the warehouse was full. Not with junk, not with random boxes. It was filled with huge, hulking shapes, all draped in heavy canvas tarps, like sleeping giants. They were arranged in neat rows, with wide aisles between them. It was orderly, deliberate. My father's work. I walked down the central aisle, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence. The scale of the place was overwhelming. It was like a tomb, a museum of forgotten things. I reached out and touched one of the tarps. The canvas was thick, stiff with age. I lifted a corner. Underneath was the curved, wooden flank of something. I swept my light over it. It was a boat, a beautiful vintage wooden speedboat, resting on a custom-built trailer. Its mahogany hull gleamed even under a thick layer of dust. The chrome fittings were tarnished but intact. It was a piece of art. I let the tarp fall and moved to the next shape. It was a car, a classic convertible from the 50s, with sweeping fins and a wide chrome grille. Its tires were flat, its paint job faded, but it was all there. I went from one covered object to the next, a growing sense of awe and confusion building inside me. There were vintage motorcycles, old arcade cabinets, a massive, intricate printing press, what looked like an entire dismantled diner counter made of stainless steel, and stacks of something that looked like old theater seats. This wasn't junk. This was a collection. A curated, hidden museum of 20th century Americana. My father, the quiet accountant, had a secret life. But why? And how? In the far corner of the warehouse, my light found something different. A small, partitioned-off area. An office. I walked over and pushed open a flimsy door. Inside was a simple metal desk, a worn-out office chair, and a bank of gray filing cabinets. Unlike the rest of the warehouse, the office felt lived in. There was a coffee-stained mug on the desk, a calendar on the wall, permanently turned to November, 2 years ago, the month he died. My light fell on a metal box sitting in the center of the desk. It was a simple cash box, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store, secured with a small, cheap lock. This had to be it, the explanation. I rattled the handle, but it was locked. I checked the desk drawers. They were empty, save for some dried-up pens and paper clips. I ran my hands under the desk, along the cool metal, searching. My fingers brushed against a piece of tape. I peeled it back. Taped to the underside of the central drawer was a tiny, silver key. My breath hitched. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock on the box. It turned easily. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no cash. There was only a thick, sealed envelope with my name, Leo, written on the front in my father's familiar, neat handwriting. I sat down in the dusty chair, the springs groaning in protest. The single beam from my phone's flashlight illuminated the envelope, making my name seem to glow in the darkness. This was it. A message from the dead. A final conversation I never thought I'd have. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. I pulled out a thick stack of folded pages and began to read. The letter was dated the week before he died. The moment I saw the date, a cold dread washed over me. He knew. He must have known he was dying. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I had to stop for a second, my eyes squeezed shut against the sudden burn of tears. He'd been sick for months, but he and Brenda had told me it was just a persistent flu, something he couldn't shake. They'd lied. They'd protected me from the truth, and in doing so, they'd robbed me of the chance to say goodbye. I forced myself to focus on the words, his handwriting a comforting, familiar sight in the oppressive gloom. My dearest Leo, it began. If you are reading this, then it means I'm gone. And it means Brenda has done exactly what I expected she would. I am so sorry. I am sorry for the secrets, and I am sorry for leaving you to face her alone. Please know that none of this is your fault. I had to pause again, my throat tight. I could hear his voice in the words, the quiet, gentle tone he always used with me. I know she probably told you this place was worthless, a liability. In a way, she's right. On paper, it's a money pit. The taxes are high, the building needs work. That was intentional. I needed it to look like a bad investment, something she wouldn't fight for, something her lawyers would advise her to let go of. something that would pass to you without a fuss. This place, Leo, isn't an inheritance, it's a life raft. I read on, my mind reeling. He explained that after he got his diagnosis, he knew he had to protect the things that mattered. Not for their monetary value, but for what they represented. He'd started collecting these things years ago, after my mother died. It was his way of coping, he wrote, of holding on to pieces of a world that was disappearing. Each object was a rescue. The boat was from an old lake resort being torn down. The car was rusting in a farmer's field. The arcade games were from a boardwalk arcade that was being demolished. He was a secret historian, a curator of forgotten treasures. Brenda never understood, he wrote. She sees value only in what is new, what is profitable. She would have sold all of this for scrap. She would have called it clearing out the clutter. But this isn't clutter, Leo. This is our story. Your grandfather worked at the plant that built the engine for that car. Your mother and I had our first date at the diner that used to have that counter. I wanted you to have these pieces of us, of your history. The letter went on to detail the collection, but then it shifted. But there is more here than just memories, he wrote. I knew I couldn't leave you with just a pile of beautiful, useless things. I had to leave you a future, a real one. Look at the wall behind the desk. To the left of the filing cabinets. There's a loose cinder block about 3 feet up from the floor. It's the one with the crack that looks like a lightning bolt. You always loved thunderstorms. Inside, you'll find the real key to this place. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I moved the beam of my phone to the wall he described. It was a plain, gray, cinder block wall. I scanned it, and there it was, 3 feet up, a fine, jagged crack running from top to bottom. A lightning bolt. My heart pounded in my chest. I ran my fingers over the rough surface. It felt solid. I pushed. Nothing. I wedged my fingers into the crack and pulled. The block resisted, then scraped backward, revealing a dark, hollow space within the wall. I reached inside, my fingers closing around a second metal box, this one heavier, more substantial than the first. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. It was an old military-style ammo can, painted olive drab. It was locked not with a key, but with a combination lock. My hope faltered. I had no idea what the combination could be. I looked back at the letter, scanning the last page. The combination is your birthday, he wrote. The day you gave my life its true purpose. Month, day, year. 8 digits. I felt a fresh wave of tears well up. Of course. I carefully spun the dials, my fingers numb and clumsy. 08 14 2006. The lock clicked open. I lifted the heavy lid. The box was packed tight. On the very top was another envelope. I opened it. Inside wasn't a letter. It was cash. Stacks of it, bundled in paper bands. I pulled one out. $100 bills. I started pulling out the bundles, my hands shaking uncontrollably. $10,000 in each. There were 10 bundles. $100,000. I sank back into the chair, the stacks of cash piled on the desk in front of me, looking unreal in the narrow beam of my phone light. I couldn't process it. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was enough to get an apartment, buy a car, go to college. It was a new start. It was everything. Underneath the cash, there was more. A thick leather-bound journal, several smaller notebooks, and a slim, modern laptop computer. I picked up the journal. It was my father's ledger, but instead of numbers, it was filled with his neat handwriting, detailing the history of every single item in the warehouse, where he found it, what he paid for it, and the story behind it. It was a catalog of his secret life. The smaller notebooks were filled with technical drawings, repair manuals he'd written himself, and lists of contacts, specialists, collectors, parts suppliers. And then, the laptop. I opened it. I pressed the power button, not expecting it to work, but it whirred to life, the screen glowing, bathing the small office in a soft blue light. It was fully charged. It booted up to a simple desktop. There was only one file on it, a folder labeled, "For Leo." I clicked it open. Inside were hundreds of files. Scanned documents, photographs, videos. I opened a subfolder labeled Patents. Inside were legal documents for 3 different patents registered in my father's name. They were for small, ingenious tools he'd designed for restoring vintage electronics. Tools he'd probably invented right here in this warehouse. Another folder was labeled Accounts. It contained spreadsheets detailing offshore bank accounts and investments, all under a holding company I'd never heard of. The numbers were staggering. It wasn't just the 100,000 in cash. There was more. So much more. Brenda hadn't just underestimated the warehouse. She had no idea this existed. My father, the quiet, unassuming accountant, had built a secret financial empire, a fortress to protect his legacy, and me, from her. I leaned back, the sheer scale of his planning, his foresight, his love, washing over me. He hadn't just left me a life raft. He'd left me an entire fleet. The weight of it all finally broke me. I put my head down on the dusty desk, next to a pile of $100 bills, and I cried. I cried for my father, for the years he'd spent building this secret world while pretending to be someone else. I cried for the conversations we never had, for the man I was only just getting to know, now that he was gone. I cried for the lonely, scared kid I had been for the last 2 years, not knowing that this was waiting for me, that he had never, not for a second, abandoned me. And I cried with a furious, burning anger for Brenda, for her lies, for her coldness, for the small, petty world she lived in, completely oblivious to the magnificent, secret life of the man she'd married. The tears eventually slowed, leaving me exhausted and empty, but also strangely calm. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was joined by something new, a fierce, quiet determination. My father had given me more than money and a collection of old things. He'd given me a mission. He'd entrusted me with his legacy. Sitting there in the cold, dusty office, bathed in the glow of the laptop screen, I felt a shift inside me. The fear that had been my constant companion for 2 years began to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose. This place wasn't a tomb. It was a workshop. It was a laboratory. It was a sanctuary. And now, it was mine. I closed the laptop and looked around the small office. This was my new beginning. The first step was practical. The $100,000 in the box was my operating capital. It was freedom from shelters and part-time jobs. It was the ability to think beyond the next meal. I spent the rest of that first day, and well into the night, just taking stock. I used the flashlight on my phone to explore every corner of the warehouse, this time not with confusion, but with a new understanding. I pulled back every tarp, cross-referencing each car, boat, and machine with the entries in my father's journal. I ran my hands over the cool metal and smooth wood, feeling the history in them. These weren't just objects. They were survivors, just like me. My father's journal was my new textbook. He wrote about the art of restoration, the patience it required. He detailed his process for sourcing rare parts, for rebuilding engines, for stripping away layers of neglect to find the beauty underneath. His passion bled through every page. It was a love letter to a lost world, and a manual for how to bring it back. The next morning, I walked back into Crestfall. The town looked different in the bright sunlight, less sleepy, more peaceful. I found a small motel and paid for a week in cash. A hot shower felt like a baptism. As the grime of the last 24 hours washed away, I felt like I was shedding an old skin. I bought new clothes at the hardware store, sturdy work boots, jeans, flannel shirts. I bought a heavy-duty flashlight, work gloves, and a box of cleaning supplies. Then I went to the small diner I'd seen on Main Street. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, poured me a coffee. "You new in town?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. "I just took over the old warehouse at the end of Ironwood Lane." Her eyebrows shot up. "The old Beaumont place? Hasn't anyone been in there for years? Heard it was falling apart." "It needs some work," I admitted, "but it's solid." She refilled my cup. "Well, good luck to you, kid. That place has been the town ghost for as long as I can remember." The town ghost. I liked that. My father would have too. For the next week, I established a routine. I'd wake up early, have breakfast at the diner, and then spend 10 to 12 hours at the warehouse. My first task was simple: cleaning. I swept away years of accumulated dust and grime. I washed the concrete floors. I wiped down every surface in the office. With each stroke of the broom, with each clean rag, I felt like I was reclaiming the space, making it my own. The physical labor was grounding. It tired me out in a way that left no room for the anxious thoughts that used to crowd my mind. While I worked, I listened. My father had left behind a small, battery-powered radio, and I tuned it to a local classic rock station. The music filled the vast space, chasing away the oppressive silence. And I started to see the path my father had laid out. The patents were for tools that would make the restoration work easier. The contacts in his notebooks were a network of people who shared his passion. The money was the fuel to get the engine started. He hadn't just left me a puzzle. He'd left me the instruction manual and all the pieces. After a week of cleaning, I turned my attention to the office. I needed a base of operations. I used some of the cash to have the electricity turned back on. The moment the overhead fluorescent lights flickered to life, illuminating the entire warehouse, was transformative. The shadows retreated. The sleeping giants were fully revealed in the steady, humming light. It was no longer a tomb. It was a cathedral of forgotten things. I bought a new computer, a comfortable chair, and a small refrigerator. I set up an internet connection. The office became my command center. I spent my evenings poring over the files on my father's laptop, educating myself. I learned about patent law, about setting up a business, about the niche markets for high-end restored Americana. My father had even left a business plan, a detailed 5-year projection for a company he'd named Legacy Restorations. It was all there, a complete turnkey future. It was almost too much. There were moments of doubt, of course. I'd stand in the middle of the warehouse floor, surrounded by these massive, complicated projects, and feel a crushing wave of inadequacy. I was just a kid. I didn't know how to rebuild a V8 engine or rewire a 1960s jukebox. What was I thinking? In those moments, I would go back to his letter. I kept it in the top drawer of the desk, and I would read the last paragraph over and over. "Don't be afraid to fail, Leo. Every scratch, every dent is a lesson." I didn't learn any of this overnight. I just learned to be patient with myself. Be patient with yourself. You have my hands. You have my heart. You can do this. I believe in you. His belief became my shield against my own self-doubt. One name in his book of contacts was circled several times: Art Miller, with a phone number and the note, "My lawyer, the only one I trust." After 2 weeks of settling in, I knew it was time to make the call. My heart was pounding as I dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered. "Miller?" "Hello, my name is Leo Vance," I said, my own voice sounding small and young. "My father was Robert Vance. He left your name and number for me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I thought for a second he might hang up. "Robert's boy," the voice, Art's voice, finally said. It was softer now, less brisk. "I was wondering when you'd call. Your father told me to expect it. Where are you?" "I'm at his warehouse," I said, "in Crestfall." I heard a low whistle. So you made it. Good. That was step one. Robert had a lot of faith in you. We talked for over an hour. I told him everything. About Brenda, about finding the letter, the money, the laptop. He listened patiently, occasionally asking a sharp, insightful question. He wasn't surprised by any of it. He'd helped my father set up the entire structure, the holding company, the offshore accounts, the transfer of the deed. He was the architect of my life raft. Your father was a very smart man, Leo, Art said, and a very careful one. He loved you more than anything. He spent the last year of his life ensuring you would be safe and independent. He didn't trust his wife, and it turns out his instincts were spot on. He explained the legal situation. Brenda had no claim to the warehouse or anything associated with the holding company. It was all ironclad, protected. The patents were active and valuable. The money was clean. It was all mine, free and clear. What do I do now? I asked, the question feeling enormous. Now, Art said, his voice firm but kind. You get to work. I'll handle the legal and financial side of things. I'll fly out next week and we can go over the paperwork. Your job is to become the man your father knew you could be. Your job is to build the legacy. His visit a week later was a whirlwind of activity. Art was a man in his late 60s, with a sharp mind and a no-nonsense demeanor, but there was a warmth in his eyes when he looked at me, and a reverence in his voice when he spoke of my father. He walked through the warehouse, a small, sad smile on his face. Bob always called this his Noah's Ark, he said softly. Saving two of everything, he'd say. One for the memory, one for the future. We spent 2 days in the office, going through documents. We incorporated legacy restorations. We set up business accounts. We discussed strategy. Art laid out the financial reality. The money in the accounts, combined with the value of the collection and the patents, meant I wasn't just secure, I was wealthy. Not in a flashy, sports car and mansion kind of way, but in a foundational, generational way. I had the resources to build a real, sustainable business, to hire people, to make a mark. But the number on the page wasn't what made me feel rich. I felt rich when I found a box of my father's old work clothes and pulled on one of his faded flannel shirts, and it fit perfectly. I felt rich when I found the first tool he'd patented, a delicate, brilliantly designed device for cleaning electrical contacts, and held it in my hand. I felt rich when I successfully got the lights on one of the old arcade cabinets to flicker to life, the theme music from a game I hadn't heard since I was a little kid filling the warehouse. The first project I decided to tackle was one of the smaller ones, a vintage 1950s Coca-Cola machine that had sat dormant for decades. It was a rust bucket, a complicated puzzle of wiring, refrigeration coils, and mechanics. I spent a month on it, following my father's journals, ordering parts from one of the suppliers on his list, and learning through trial and error. I got frustrated. I made mistakes. I nearly gave up a dozen times. But each time, I'd think of his letter. Be patient with yourself. Finally, one evening, I plugged it in. The machine hummed. The internal light glowed. I put a coin in the slot, pushed the button, and with a satisfying clunk, a cold glass bottle of Coke slid into the dispenser. I leaned against the machine, a triumphant, stupid grin on my face, and took a long drink. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I had brought something back from the dead. I had started. News travels fast in a small town. The lights at the old Beaumont place being on every night, the deliveries of parts and equipment, it all got people talking. The waitress at the diner, whose name I learned was Marge, started asking me what I was up to. I told her I was restoring old things, carrying on my dad's work. She just nodded, a respectful look in her eyes. One day, an old man who'd been sitting at the counter shuffled over to my booth. "You're Vance's kid?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "Yes, sir." "I knew your dad. A little. He bought that old speedboat off my brother before the marina was torn down. Quiet fella, kept to himself. but he had good hands, a respect for old things. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. You got that respect? I'm trying to, I said. He grunted, a sound that seemed to be one of approval. Good. The world's got enough people tearing things down. Needs more people building them back up. He shuffled back to his seat, leaving me with a feeling of connection, of belonging that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just some stranger anymore. I was Vance's kid. I was part of a story. Months turned into a year. The warehouse transformed. A section of it became a state-of-the-art workshop with pristine tools and equipment. Another section I converted into a small, comfortable apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every beam, every wire, I'd put in myself. The rest of the space I kept as a showroom, a gallery for the restored pieces. The Coke machine was the first. Then came a Wurlitzer jukebox, its colored lights glowing, its chrome gleaming. Then a pinball machine, dinging and flashing in a corner. Each finished project was a victory, a connection to my father. Each one taught me something new. I wasn't just restoring machines, I was restoring myself. With art's help, I launched a website for legacy restorations. I posted photos of the first few finished pieces. The response was slow at first, then steady, then overwhelming. Collectors, designers, and museums from all over the world started emailing and calling. My father had been right. There was a deep hunger for these tangible pieces of history, for things that were built to last. The first big sale was the jukebox. A collector in Japan paid a price that made my head spin. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the validation. It was the proof that my father's vision was real. The money was just a byproduct of the passion. I hired my first employee, a young woman from town named Sarah, who was a genius with electronics. Then a retired mechanic named Gus, who had forgotten more about engines than I would ever know. We became a small, tight-knit team, a family of sorts. The warehouse, once silent and empty, was now filled with the sounds of work, of music from the jukebox, of laughter. One afternoon, a sleek, black car I didn't recognize pulled up to the warehouse. A woman in a sharp business suit got out. It was Brenda. I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the day she kicked me out. She stood there for a moment, taking in the clean, painted building, the new sign, the landscaped entrance. Her face was a mask of confusion. I walked out to meet her, my heart calm, my hands steady. I wasn't that scared kid on the porch anymore. "Leo?" she said, her voice uncertain. "What is all this?" "This is my business," I said simply. "My inheritance." Her eyes narrowed. She had clearly heard rumors, seen the article about my company in a design magazine, or had a lawyer trace my success. She was here for a piece of it. "Your father left you a pile of junk," she said, the old dismissiveness creeping back into her voice. "I saw the probate files. This has to be from something else." "He was smarter than you ever gave him credit for," I said. There was no anger in my voice, just a quiet statement of fact. He left me everything that mattered. She started to talk about lawyers, about how she was entitled to half of his hidden assets, about how I had deceived her. I just listened. When she was done, I shook my head. "It's all protected, Brenda. Art Miller made sure of that. There's nothing for you here." I saw a flash of real fury in her eyes then, the ugly, grasping desperation of someone who had fundamentally misunderstood the value of everything and everyone around her. She saw a fortune she'd been cheated out of. She couldn't see the real treasure. She couldn't see the love, the planning, the legacy. She just saw the money. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers," she hissed. "I'm sure I will," I said, and then I turned and walked back into my workshop, back to my life, leaving her standing alone in the gravel driveway. That was the last I ever saw of her. Her legal challenges went nowhere, just as Art had promised. They were a nuisance, an echo from a life that was no longer mine. My life was here, in Crestfall. It was in the smell of sawdust and solder. It was in the satisfaction of a perfectly restored machine. It was in the quiet evenings I spent in my apartment, reading my father's journals, feeling his presence not as a ghost, but as a guide. I finally understood what he meant. He hadn't just left me money or a business. He had left me a purpose. He had taught me that the most valuable things are not the ones that are easily bought, but the ones that are painstakingly built, cared for, and brought back to life. He taught me that being rich has nothing to do with the number in your bank account, and everything to do with having a place to call home, work that you love, and a story that is yours to tell. The warehouse isn't a liability. It's the heart of my world. It's a testament to a quiet man's extraordinary love for his son. It's the legacy he built for me, and the one I will spend the rest of my life building for him. And that feeling, that purpose, is worth more than any fortune. It's a truth I had to be kicked out to discover, a home I had to be made homeless to find. And for that, in a strange and complicated way, I will always be grateful. This whole journey taught me that inheritance isn't just about what's left to you, but what's left in you. My father left me his resilience, his passion, his quiet strength. And that's a fortune that can never be spent. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. This story is deeply personal, and sharing it feels like I'm honoring my father's memory in a new way. I know so many of you have your own stories of loss, of starting over, of finding strength you never knew you had. This channel is for you. It's a community for people who understand that the hardest parts of our lives are often what make us who we are. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing. And I'd love for you to share in the comments, what's an inheritance, tangible or intangible, that has shaped your life? I read every single one, and your stories matter. You're not alone. We're building this legacy together.